Hello and welcome to Adventures in Theater History, where we bring you the best stories from the deep and fascinating history of theater in the city of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Peter Schmitz, and our theme music is by Christopher Mark Colucci. Today, as we continue our Season 4, exploring the modern history of Philadelphia nonprofit theater, I have for you not just one, but two fascinating folks to share with you, Carol Rocamora and Michael Hollinger. Carol and Michael were part of a highly successful theatrical institution of the 1980s and 90s, the Philadelphia Festival Theater for New Plays. Though the memories of PFT are beginning to fade a bit around these parts, one of the great things about doing this podcast is that I can shine a light on the great work and legacy of this organization once again. So before we meet them in person, let me quickly run through both of their very impressive bios. The author, translator, scholar, and playwright Carol Rocamora founded the Philadelphia Festival Theater for New Plays in 1981, the city's first independent nonprofit devoted solely to developing the work of contemporary American playwrights. Carol continued to lead this organization as its artistic director through 1994, and during this period, she produced, directed, and fostered over 100 new plays by everyone from Willie Reale to Romulus Linney, Lanford Wilson, and Lee Blessing, and also Philly writers like Albert Inarado and Bruce Graham. After leaving PFT, Carol was a faculty member at both NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and also the Juilliard School until moving on last year. But she's not done yet. Carol continues to do what she's done for many years, writing theater criticism for such publications as The Nation, The New York Times, and The London Guardian. She currently divides her time between both New York and Philadelphia and is a voting member of the Outer Critics Circle and Drama Desk Awards. Our other guest, Carol's former literary manager at PFT, Michael Hollinger, is now a professor of theater at Villanova University, where he teaches both graduate and undergraduate courses. Michael's published plays have been produced widely throughout the United States and abroad, including such plays as Opus, Red Herring, Incorruptible, and An Empty Plate at the Café du Grand Bœuf. His work as a lyricist and book writer on musicals include Touchtones, A Wonderful Noise, and Moon Over the Brewery. It's all very impressive, but back in the late 1980s, as we will learn, Michael had gotten his master's in theater from Villanova University and was still a struggling young Philly theater artist, doing touring children's shows and trying to get a foothold in the local theater market until one day he walked into the offices of the PFT, and the rest, of course, is, well, history. I talked to Carol and Michael over Zoom in October of 2025. Carol Rocamora, Michael Hollinger, welcome to Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. It's an honor.
Well, it's so thrilling to see you both there on the screen. The audience can't see this, but I'm now looking at three images, one of myself, which is very distracting, but one of you, Carol, and you are in New York right now? Yeah. And Michael, you're on the road. You're talking to me from, you said Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania?
Beautiful Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania in the autumn foliage season.
Wow. So you're back. That's not far from where you grew up, right?
Well, it kind of is. I grew up in central Pennsylvania in York.
Right. All right. Well, but you're currently on your duties for Villanova, I know. And so that's why you're on the road and you're very happily talking to us, but from a hotel room. And I know you got to check out at a certain point this morning. So let's get this conversation started. But Carol, let's turn to you first. As I mentioned in our sort of pre-interview conversation, I like to collect origin stories, how you got your superpowers. And I'd like to know, Carol, what was your first exposure to the world of theater? I understand that you had a family that was already in showbiz.
Yes, indeed. So my father was a general counsel for a business called Music Corporation of America.
I've heard of it.
Universal Studios. So my first exposure for theater was Ethel Merman in our living room singing the score of Gypsy before it was produced. I mean, really.
Now, our listeners can't see it, but both Michael and I jaws just dropped, and we both put our hands over our mouth and were in amazement when you told us that.
Or Adler and Ross playing pajama game at our piano. So, I mean, how could you not fall in love with the theater if you're a kid? The exposure was so overwhelming that how can you not want to go into the theater?
Well, how much time did you spend going to plays, working on plays as a child or in school?
Well, in high school, I'm sure like Michael, I performed in plays, etc. I remember playing Cassandra in The Trojan Women as a senior, that kind of thing.
That's some high school you had. Where were you doing the Trojan Women?
The Scarsdale, New York. So,
Oh, I see.
But the thing is, I'm old. So when I went to college, there was no opportunity to major in theater, and one didn't even think about it. So I got a very classical education. I ended up majoring in languages.
Well, you came down here to Philadelphia. You went to Bryn Mawr College. Is that right? Yes, which is where my mother also went. I feel very fond of Bryn Mawr. Oh, yeah. My mom was an alum.
My daughter is currently there. My
Well, how
daughter's
about
a
that?
junior at Bryn Mawr right now.
But as you know, it's a very classical education. So I think there was a music major, but of course, no theater major.
Well, you ended up studying language. You studied Russian?
So now I have no idea why. I think because everyone else was majoring in history, I was good in languages. Too many people majoring in French, so I picked Russian.
A simple language, an easy language.
But then what makes it worse is I went on to get a PhD in it just because.
And you got the PhD at University of Pennsylvania, so you stayed in the area. So how committed were you to the Philadelphia area at that point in your life?
Well, my husband's a doctor at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, so we were there, permanently raised our three sons there.
When had you met him?
When I was at Bryn Mawr, and
I
he
see.
was at medical school at Penn.
If you told me he was at Haverford, I thought that was too easy, but
Oh, no, yes, he graduated Haverford.
there you are, just like my mom and dad. Yep.
Really?
Yes.
After this podcast, we have to compare notes.
Okay, well, but so you have a PhD in Russian literature, and you were teaching Russian literature at Haverford, at Bryn Mawr, and University of Pennsylvania. Your life was very full. You had a marriage, you had three sons, but why did you get tangled up again in the theater world?
I don't even know how it happened, but I got a job at People's Light and Theater Company in development, fundraising.
Well, how did you make that jump?
I can't remember. I mean, I think it's because I didn't love Russian language literature that much, but later that came back. I ended up working on Chekhov much later in my career, but at that point, I wasn't excited by it. I don't know how. Michael, do you remember how I ended up?
Well, I found a newspaper article from 1981 that you were studying acting at Temple University in the Hedgerow Theater. Is that right?
Yes, I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up, but okay.
Oh, well, we are ripping the lid off. We are exposing the dark secrets of your past.
So I don't know how that became a job at People's Light, but I was there in 1979 when Danny Fruchter and Alda Cortez and Marcia Sanders and all those wonderful people were laying the stairs to the very first opening of that barn. So that was a pretty exciting time.
So then you started scouting their new play festival. I also found an interview with a theater critic, William Collins, who saw you at the new play festival in Louisville at the Humana Festival.
So actually, I also was in a couple of plays at People's Light, which is something I don't want to talk about either. But I was in a couple of plays out there. And then I don't know how it happened. I think I went to the Eugene O'Neill National Playwrights Conference first.
Run by Lloyd Richards.
Yes, and was totally full of admiration for their work there. I know Michael knows it well. Overwhelmed by the richness. I was there in 1981. Guess what was on the boards then?
August Wilson, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
I saw the first reading of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom there. It was 4 hours and 45 minutes long. And I remember when we walked out of the barn where it was being read, Ernie Shear, who was then the Bulletin critic, do you know what he said? He said, "The Messiah has come." Wow. So how can you not fall madly in love with new play development? And then I went down and saw the Actors Theater of Louisville. So the O'Neill takes a play at its very seminal form, where in utero, right?
Yeah.
And Actors Theater of Louisville puts it up fully. And I thought, my goodness, no one in Philadelphia is doing that. So why not start a theater devoted to that?
Sure, why not? I have that thought all the time. Why not start a theater? It's like, falling off a log. So this led you at the age of 39, am I right, to found your own organization from scratch, the Philadelphia Festival of New Plays. You raised $40,000, I see.
Yes, we did, didn't we? I think Michael wasn't there, but we did. We started out, I think we got an office in a church around the corner on 37th and Chestnut, across from International House, 2 flights up around the corner from the Harold Prince Theater. And we just opened shop. And it was me and I think one other person and a reader named Lois Keats, who lived around the corner from me in West Mount Airy. And we put out announcements. And sure enough, we had a season.
Yes, I know here that you put an ad in the Dramatists Guild Quarterly, just a little ad, and asking for submissions. What happened next?
Well, we got 600 submissions in our first year, which is extraordinary. And Lois was going crazy. She didn't sign up for this. But I was just looking back, Michael, at our notes. Do you know that in 5 years later, we got 2,200 submissions? And we were up to 44 readers in 5 years.
And this was at a time when it would actually, a big hunk of paper would arrive in your desk and you'd pile it up, in huge stacks, right?
There was no internet, and exactly, everything was done by hand. But it was really a thrilling experience to start off. And I remember our first season, we grew from, I think we had 3 productions in the spring, 1 week each. And the idea was that it was an independent, nonprofit professional theater dedicated to the development and production of new plays by contemporary American playwrights. And the idea was to go in between the O'Neill and Louisville. In other words, bring the writer in. They were all world premieres. Bring the writer in and have him or her stay with us for 3 weeks in residence during the entire rehearsal process in the rehearsal room. And then during the first week of production, to get up in front of the audience. Some of them didn't like to do it. Others loved it, like Bruce Graham, and do a Q&A period. So that was the concept of it. And I think, honestly, I can hardly believe it. Our first annual budget was $75,000. We grew to $1 million budget by about our 10th year.
Well, something was going on in the early to mid 80s in Philadelphia. This was a time when other local theater organizations like the Philadelphia Company and Sarah Goranczyk, who we talked to, the Wilma Theater and the Ziskas we talked to, the Walnut Street Theater and Bernard, who we talked to, and the Music Theater Festival with Marjorie Samup was all just getting started and raising money. What was in the air around that time? What was happening that this funding and this excitement was available for new nonprofit theater organizations?
Well, I think just that there was a gap there was a void in terms of producing new plays. And thank God for Pew Charitable Trust and the William Penn Foundation, and then the many, many other corporations and foundations and individuals who contributed.
So part of it was just the interest and wealth of the local philanthropic community was interested in going and investing in the arts heavily for Philadelphia.
But we got a lot of national support eventually. We won an award from Fund for New American Plays, American Express Foundation, CBS. Those were all national awards. And again, because of new play development.
And, it's interesting. I'll just jump in for a second here, Peter, because I've been listening to all of your episodes on the Broadway tryout period. Because of the Broadway tryout period and Philadelphia's prominence in that network, Philadelphia had an audience that was very well attuned to new work and to seeing it on its way to New York. And of course, as you noted in your show, bouncing back later on during a national tour. But as the Broadway tryout period basically dried up, there was still a really well-educated audience that was attuned to new work here. And yet there was not yet a producing theater or body of theaters that were specializing in new work. So it seemed like a powder keg, maybe for lack of a better word, waiting for a spark. Also, I would say, and Carol, you'll affirm or deny this, it seemed as though funders at the time were very hospitable. The mere fact of the founding of so many theaters in the 80s and early 90s seems to speak to a funding culture that was not just individual philanthropies, but institutional philanthropies was very important to the.
Absolute. God, I mean, God bless Pew and William Penn. None of us could have done it without them.
So tell us about these first seasons or so, and the early successes. Who were the playwrights you began to work with regularly? Were they generally from the Philadelphia area or from other places?
Well, the answer is both.
Okay.
We were, I mean, one thinks that we should go after the names, and we did indeed, Michael, as Michael knows, get incredible names. Forgive me, I'm going to read them here. In our 15 years, David Mamet, Joyce Carol Oates, Jules Pfeiffer, Romulus Linney, Lanford Wilson, Albert Inarado, Chaim Potok, and Jack Gelber. And that was all great and very glamorous. But the real joy came from finding the Bruce Grahams.
Well, right. Yeah. Why does the work of a 26-year-old ninth grade teacher in the Rose Tree School District come to your attention? A guy that's been doing stand-up on the side. What was his play was submitted to you, was called Berkey. And what did you feel like when you first read it?
Did fabulous research, Peter. I'm so impressed. Okay, so Lois Keats, who lived around the corner from me, who was reading these hundreds of scripts, she rejected everything. But she called me up and she said, "You better drive over here. This one's worth looking at." That's the way she said it. And that started his career as a playwright. And it was the audiences. Michael, were you there for Berkey?
I did not see Berkey. I did not see Bruce's first two shows. No, but everything after that.
Yeah, the audiences just melted. It was about a plumber from South Philadelphia who I believe is dying of cancer. Is that right? And his relationship with his son. And Bruce, I have a great story about Bruce. So Bruce comes in the office and he's like this. He's sitting there like this. And he's got these big brown eyes and he's looking at me. And I asked him if, could we do his play? He said yes. And then he left. And he told me later that his father said, "You better take their check and go to the, go to the bank and be sure you can cash it."
Well, I just saw Bruce the other day at the memorial service for Tom McCarthy. And as Bruce, he says, "I don't work for free." he's quite clear about that.
Yeah. If you ask Michael and me what we're proudest of,
yeah,
it's, sure, all the famous ones, but it's the Bruces and the Michael, brilliant career. I feel very responsible because although we didn't produce one of Michael's plays, he was Xeroxing copies of his plays while he worked for us and sending them to other theaters.
All right. Well, since you brought him up, let's move on to Michael. When did you first enter the picture?
It's a very interesting story. I had gone to Villanova, got my master's.
Well, wait. So to your origin story, I've got it right here. I did some research. Yeah. You grow up a poor farm boy in central Pennsylvania. You're eating shoe-fly pie. You're driving horse-drawn buggies. And one day you drive by 3 Mile Island nuclear plant and you're bitten by a radioactive theater bug. Is that right? Do I have that right?
That's your research is astonishing, Peter.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
It always works. Yeah. Well, give us, since we know that's true, what would be an alternate version of that might be more mundane?
I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, did theater in high school, and my parents were very active in the York Little Theater, so the community theater in York, which was pretty ambitious. So I was around plays from very young. I ran lines with my mom, and she taught me to correct her on every single punctuation mark, which taught me that scripts matter and that actors who are doing their homework will pay attention to every single thing the playwright puts on the page. And therefore, the playwright needs to encode their work well because smart people will pay close attention to it. I went to Oberlin Conservatory to study viola, but spent most of my time fleeing the practice room in order to do theater. So I wrote and produced a pair of one acts. I wrote my first full-length piece, which was a musical, which I produced and directed. Sorry, actors. And then was supposed to get an MFA in viola performance, had a full ride to go to Carnegie Mellon and study viola and get my MFA. But I said, "Can I defer this for a year? I'm a little burnt out." and moved to Philadelphia. And within 3 months, I was quite certain I never wanted to go back and be a violist. I kicked around a little. I was an actor in a touring children's theater company. I started writing plays for them because I was interested in that. Finally realized, oh my God, like literally a eureka moment while I was on tour. I think I'm a writer. I applied to Villanova and Yale School of Drama because I was late in applying. Yale turned me down. Villanova gave me a full ride to study there. So I got a great training at Villanova, where I'm now a professor. But my mentor,
Yeah, well, I see you billed as the messenger in a production of Iphigenia at Aulis in 1988. So you also
what
went
a
on stage.
messenger I was.
I'll bet you were.
Yes.
I bet you delivered the
Yeah.
news.
I met my wife playing Pippin. She played Catherine, directed by a guy named Father Peter Donahue, who is now the president of the university.
Oh my goodness.
He taught Peter Donahue, a priest, taught you and Megan how to kiss.
Imagine being coached by a priest. Here's how to do this. We didn't have intimacy choreography back then.
I remember. But were you aware of what Carol was doing at that point at the New Play Festival?
Yes, I was a subscriber of the Philadelphia Festival Theater for New Plays in the 1987 and 1988 seasons.
Well, Carol's face just lit up because she did not know that.
I did not
know that. No, I was a subscriber, so I saw Bruce's third play, Minor Demons, directed by my future mentor, Jim Christie, and on beyond that. And I was inspired by that to become a script reader. So I worked with your literary manager, Richard Walcott, as literary manager and dramaturg. He hired me, I know, may he rest in peace. Richard hired me as a script reader at the princely rate of $5 per script. And what that taught me, not only did I train my muscle for reading plays and evaluating them, it very valuable for me as a playwright was seeing what was circulating in the new play marketplace, because I had only studied masterworks, right? I went and got an MA at Villanova. We studied masterworks by dead people and some by living people. But suddenly I was reading what was circulating in the marketplace, so I could see what and why grabbed my attention and held me, and what said to me, this is an amateur, this is not a professional. So it really trained me as a playwright to begin to see, what do I need to do to my plays to make them stand out among the big slush pile?
Why was this the best job you ever had?
Well, this is a funny story. So I went to Villanova and I was done being an actor. I was like a year and a half, 2 years of doing children's plays in a van. Enough of this. Got my master's, came out of Villanova, needed a job, joined another children's theater company, and started touring around as an actor. I was really at a kind of crisis. I didn't want to do that. But Jim Christie, my mentor who directed for Carol, let me know that this literary manager position was opening up, and he recommended me for it because I was bookish and liked plays. I came in, Carol gave me 5 scripts to read and to come back and give my reports. I took them on tour with me as an actor, and like 15 minutes later, I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be stuck in an office 50 hours a week. I'll be on the road. I didn't read them. I came back in a week later. I walked up to the receptionist and said, I'm here to return these 5 plays. I've decided I'm not going to apply for this job. She said, well, Carol will want to talk with you. I said, no, I'm really clear on this. She said, Carol will want to talk to you. So she sent me down the hall to talk to Carol. And Carol said, listen, you could be an actor anytime. A position like this doesn't open up very often. Read the scripts, bring in your reports, and we'll talk. And I read the scripts that week. And I did not know, I had not been paying attention in the last 2 years to what the theater was programming. So I was reading 3 plays that I think were programmed for the coming season and 2 that had just been programmed. And I gave them my very serious, I didn't hold anything back. I didn't say, oh, what a lovely thing you've chosen for your season. I think I rejected several of the plays that Carol had already programmed for the season.
But Carol is laughing and applauding as you say that, because she's delighted by that.
I think it got me the job, Peter, because there was a sort of interim literary manager working there who was a script reader, who's a lovely person and a bit of mentor for me. This is Mark Kafta, and many people will know Mark Kafta. You've probably run across his reviews, Peter, and the now late Mark Kafta. Mark was a delightful person and very knowledgeable and an excellent friend. but also very diplomatic. He was quite happy to like a play or not like a play, but I think what Carol needed was somebody who would be a good taster for the queen. In other words, somebody who could, I'm referring to you as a queen here, Carol, only with the greatest respect, not with any sense of diva, but really there were so many plays to sift through. Carol needed a set of eyes that could read a play with her eyes. And which is not to say we always agreed aesthetically, but I think when she read my script report, she felt like, oh, here's somebody who's going to actually find the good in the plays and to be able to pass on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plays a year and only give me the stuff that is worth looking at. So I brought in my script reports, we had a conversation, and she hired me, and the rest is history.
Carol, what do you remember about meeting this young man? Why were you so insistent on having him in your organization, even though he was so standoffish and trying to run out the door? Why did you grab him and say, no, young man, you stay right here?
He was a star. I knew it from the minute I saw him.
But why not at this point, Michael, just write plays for yourself and rent The Painted Bride and put on a one-man show called Alone, where you do 4 different characters? Why not be that kind of self-starting guy? Why are you joining an organization at all?
It's a good question. I didn't know anything about theater production, really, meaning administration, meaning being a producer, which is interestingly what I've done for the last 19 years at Villanova, is produce things. I was interested in new plays. As I said, I felt there was something to learn about the new play marketplace. And as a playwright, I had a feeling I was going to learn a lot about that. What I didn't know that I was going to learn was all the turning cogs that are part of a nonprofit. And anybody who works at a nonprofit, especially one of modest scale, as the Festival Theater was at the time, you quickly learn all the cogs. You go, oh, here's how marketing works. Here's how development works. Here's how front of house works. Here's how production works. Here's how a reading works. Here's how a board works. And Carol is really my primo mentor in all of that, because, she taught me how to write a letter to a playwright and how to write a letter to a funder. And we worked on marketing copy together, and we worked on grants together, and we flattered board members together, and the diplomacy involved. How do you talk to an audience member? How do you talk to a potential funder? All of those things Carol is a master at and taught me so much.
So what were some of the highlights of those years at the Festival Theater? We're now talking about the late 80s, early 90s. Who were the big personalities you ran into? What sort of technical backing did you need for your productions? What are the great stories from those years you were there? You mentioned a lot of big names there a while back. Who showed up and threw their weight around?
They all showed up, but I have to tell you what the thing that moves me the most. Michael, were you there for Established Price?
No, I came shortly after Dennis McIntyre had died. So Carol is referring to Dennis McIntyre, who did how many plays with you? Just the one?
He did a beautiful play about corporate responsibility, corporate takeover. So at that time, I think we started, every show ran 1 week. We ended up running 3 weeks for each show. But at the end of the first week, the lead actor was rushed to the hospital with an emergency appendectomy. And that happened Saturday night. And Grace Grellet, the wonderful Grace Grellet, and I'll talk about her and other members of our staff in a minute, called everyone in the theater and said, come in tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning, because we didn't know what to do. Everyone on the staff showed up 8:30 in the morning Sunday. And I called an actor that I knew from the O'Neill named Mason Adams, who's a wonderful stage actor, film actor. He was down there on Tuesday, and he did it script in hand for the next 2 weeks, but we announced to the audience every night. And for me, the most moving thing was what Grace did. And that sort of, Michael, I don't know if you agree, that I think encapsulated the whole festival theater experience, that it really was a team effort. These wonderful, dedicated Philadelphians, this is not all the fancy people who came from outside, like Michael, like Grace Grellet, who, I would love to name them if I may. So Bruce Graham and Michael, we all know, have gone on to great fame as playwrights. Jim Christie, marvelous director, he's gone on to direct tons of stuff. David Gordon, the set designer, Jerry Forsythe, the lighting designer, Hilary Misson, who started with us as a casting director and literary manager, Grace Grillet, who started with us and moved on to work for 20 years at People's Light. All these people got their start with us, and I got my start with us. I mean, that was the thrill of the whole experience, I think, and I think the most valuable thing that we did.
Well, Bruce Graham eventually has 8 plays produced with you. What other specific works do you remember that started at the Festival Theater and went on out into the wider world?
Well, that established price then went to Long Wharf Theater with Jason Robards. That was pretty good. I think A Piece of My Heart, Shirley Laura went on to Actors Theater of Louisville. I don't have the whole list, but what we're very proud of is almost all of them were published thereafter. And that's big. So we didn't make it to Broadway, but
Right.
that wasn't the
point.
In the early days, you could have evenings of one acts as well as full-length plays. But as time went by, Carol really wanted to focus more on full-length works because their future life was more substantial. They would actually fuel the repertoire of the American theater. And the audience was cultivated at the start with the sort of needle in a haystack notion. And therefore, you know that you're in for something good, even if you've never heard of these people. As time went by, the theater's reputation grew, and so it was possible for Carol and I to reach out to authors who already had a standing, maybe as playwrights, but you'd say like Jules Feiffer, also in other media, and then later on Chaim Potok, Joyce Carol Oates. These were reaching out to writers of stature who had not established themselves yet as playwrights. What I mean by this is that there was a journey from short works to longer works, and then from strictly unknown writers to writers of greater stature. And that always was a bit of a balancing act, or even a tension between, how much energy do we put into finding the next needle in a haystack versus investing in, say, a writer who is new to the theatrical form.
Carol, at what point did you decide you needed to be a playwright yourself? We had Seth Rosen on the podcast last time, and he told us that after reading hundreds of mediocre scripts that were submitted to his office every year, he just figured he could probably do at least as well as some of these people. But you went back to your original love, which was Russian literature and Chekhov.
Okay, it's all by happenstance. In 1991, there was an actor director named Richard Jenkin, who used to run the Trinity Rep Theater in Rhode Island. And he somehow found out I had a PhD in Russian literature. He asked me if I would translate The Seagull for his theater. I said, sure. So I had this, we didn't produce in the summer, so I translated it, and I sort of got hooked on it. I thought, this is really fabulous fun. And you know how there's a theory. Do you know the writer Mary Catherine Bateson? She wrote a book, Composing a Life, and she said women have a suitcase and they carry it around in their life and they never throw anything out. So I was taught never throw anything out, and I never could justify all those difficult years getting a PhD in Russian literature. I thought, okay, so I ended up, and my dear colleague Michael gave me oh dear, that's another story. Not everybody liked this idea. I decided to translate all of them and put them on at the theater, which caused a little bit of discomfort among some staff members and audience members. But you know what, Michael, looking back, we had done Three Sisters. David Mamet did a version years ago, and we put that on and nobody complained.
Yes. What I would say a couple things about it. First of all, I was on the front lines with audiences, so because I was doing talkbacks, and audiences initially, I think they were like, oh, David Mamet's done a version of Three Sisters. All right, okay. I think when the Chekhovs came in, I think some of the audiences who had been cultivated on the needle in a haystack principle were like, wait a second. Now, I think Carol Rocamora is brilliant and does wonderful translations of Chekhov and must do them. It was it certainly was a gear shift for the theater that I think not all audiences were ready to go on that ride. But then it also raises the question for me, which Peter, my sort of pre-question when we were preparing for this is connected to it, is when you're a restless intellect and creative spirit, as Carol is, must you run a theater for 30 years? Or is it possible that you have a great idea that has its time and its rightful lifespan and fosters a spate and interest in new work originating out of Philadelphia and move on? Because I think that's what was happening in that time, is Carol was going like, wow, this translation thing is pretty cool. And it didn't jibe necessarily with the theater that had been cultivated. But frankly, if you look at Philadelphia in the early to mid 90s, what was happening? All the theaters were starting to adopt new play programs.
Right.
And so the mission, in a sense, had kind of, it's like it worked. It basically fostered homegrown Philadelphia-based new theater, and other theaters were taking up the mantle. So in a way, we didn't need a Philadelphia Festival Theater for new plays anymore. Like it was okay.
First of all, Michael, I'm so grateful for your summary. You said it far better than I. I am unworthy of the beautiful words you said, and also grateful for your articulate perspective. I really agree with Michael. In the early 90s, everybody was doing, I think Danny Fruchter was really mad at me that I left People's Light, so he put on a new play festival. And I think Danny was great, but in fact, we did our job, as Michael said. We brought the excitement and the importance of new play development to prominence. And maybe it was time then, at least for me, to move on. I will say that because of those translations, and I was offered a job at NYU teaching in '93. And I started to really love that. And so that was one of the reasons why I thought it might be time to move on.
Well, you bring up NYU, which is interesting to me because when I go back to the archives and I read about these productions, of course, the names that stand out to me is the fact that my classmates, Julia Gibson and Frank Wood, were in these productions of Chekhov that you were doing. And I remember Frank coming to me and said, I've got to go back down to Philly. There's this woman named Carol Rocamora who's doing this amazing work with Chekhov, and I want to be part of it. So people were interested in what you were doing, and there was a buzz about it. But you do decide to move on from the institution in '94. And there were some people, as I understand, on the board who just said, well, if you're not there, we just ought to close the whole thing down right now.
And by the way, we started out with 6 board members in '81, and we were up to 25. And frankly, the pressure of fundraising is just overwhelming. By then, there were so many theaters that were competing for the same sources that it became more and more difficult.
So but it did go on for a couple more years. In fact, Bruce Graham was hoping to run it, right, for the next couple of years.
It did, which is great. But Michael, I'm so grateful for you for putting it in a positive context.
Well, I take the long view. And I would say at the time, I think the board was willing to say we could support a stripped down version of this, maybe. I think, Carol, you had proposed that I take on the leadership of the festival theater. And, you know, with a core of one development person, one marketing person, one production person, I considered this very deeply because, you know, artistic directorship is sort of like the apple for a lot of people in the theater field, right? What more could you want? But I was starting to get a teeny bit of traction as a playwright at the time. And I felt confident that if I were working 60 hours a week to run a theater, that I would be supporting other emerging playwrights, not this emerging playwright. And so I tried to gracefully say, you know what, that's not my path. And so really what the theater did, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Carol, was there were several outstanding grants that had been made, especially to support, I think, Bruce's final play or two and the finishing up of the Chekhov cycle, which had been funded. And so the Festival Theater was sort of on a clock to say, well, let's produce out our existing funding over the next 2 years, terminating in '96, I think, right, Carol, through Bruce's oversight as artistic director and Sally D'Souza, based at the Annenberg Center. And that
Right. Well, Michael, you say this is when you're beginning to get a little traction, but this is in fact the same year that An Empty Plate at the Café du Grand Boeuf gets produced at the Arden Theater Company. So how had everything you had gone through up to that time led to this moment? Was it the Xerox machine? Was it because you had stolen all those Xeroxes and sent them off to the Arden?
Certainly the Xeroxes are a major part of it, because at this time, if you wanted to submit your play, you had to kill a tree. So, killing trees was the way it was done. And really, as I said, my notion that if I took this job, I would put myself in the marketplace for new plays. I would see everything that was circulating. And not only that, but I was looking at all the new play development places, right? The play labs in Minneapolis and
I've worked at New Dramatists. I'd worked at the Playwright Center in Minneapolis, so I knew part of this infrastructure is going on. I wasn't aware when I was in Minneapolis at the time what was going on in Philadelphia. That was something I had to learn later. Right. But I noticed in a newspaper article that I found from the time about the production of your play, it says Hollinger said, "When you're working on other people's plays, you're constantly asking yourself the same questions you need to ask of yourself as a playwright. Does it work? Am I bored now? Are the characters real? How can it be much better?" So had this literary management work and this dramaturgical work you had done at Carol's organization helped you to become the playwright you were going to be in the future?
Absolutely. I can't possibly imagine it any other way. If all you do all day long and all night long is ask, how could this be better? When is the audience bored? When is the audience interested? If that's all you do, you build that muscle up pretty fast. I mean, I remember watching Bobby, Can You Hear Me? A play by Judy Gebauer, which Carol directed. Beautiful play about Bobby Sands, the IRA revolutionary and hunger striker. And there was a scene where a character tries to cut a deal with Bobby to name names, and he places a coin on a corner of the bench where Bobby is sitting in incarceration. And he says, if I come back into this room and that coin is gone, I'll know we have a deal. And he leaves the room and Bobby looks down at that coin. And I felt an entire audience lean forward in the silence at that coin and at Bobby Sands' hand to say, is he going to pick up that coin? Because we know what that means. So moments like that where I went, oh, I see. Here's how a playwright can use a situation and a physical object and the shared experience of an audience to create a present tense moment of incredible power. I want to do that. And that's the sort of thing that I learned over and over and over again at the Festival Theater.
And Carol, by 2001, by now you've moved on, your own play about Olga Knipper and Anton Chekhov, which is called I Take Your Hand in Mine, is presented at the Almeida Theater in London with Paul Schofield and Irene Worth. And then it went on to be done around the world. And since then, you've been teaching at NYU. Did you have that feeling of completion of your world all coming together? Everything you'll be able to unpack that suitcase you were talking about?
Oh, and by the way, Peter Brook directed it also.
Well, go ahead. Another big name just landed on the floor. Okay.
That's a story let's not go into right now. But anyway, I think Michael will agree. People who work in the theater, we keep on going. Very few people, right, Michael? Very few people stop. I'm embarrassed to tell you what I'm doing now. You won't believe it. I don't think Michael.
It'll just be between us. Go ahead.
What are you doing?
I'm a theater critic. Is that in my bio?
That's horrible. No.
I'm a terrible theater critic because I love everything. And if I don't like it, I refuse to review it. Because I remember times, Michael knows this, where I would get up after an opening night. We opened on Thursday night in Philadelphia at the Festival Theater. I would get up at 6 a.m. on Friday and drive to the 7-Eleven in my nightgown with a coat over to get the review. And I would sit in the car and cry. And then I would throw the newspaper out the window of the car. So I get no joy in critique, in writing negative reviews. I get tremendous pleasure about writing positive reviews.
But Michael, going back to, we were talking about how Carol gets to unpack her suitcase and sort of make her life whole. You end up writing a play called Opus, which is about a string quartet, which takes you back to your early training as a musician. In fact, the viola player is the key element in the plot. And I know this because I ended up doing a reading of that play after it had already been produced at the Arden. We did a reading of it that Marcia Ferguson staged, and then afterwards a string quartet came in, and James Imes, who goes on to become a playwright, was also in the company. But what was it about Opus? Why did you feel like you needed to make your life whole again with that particular play?
What a great way of phrasing it. It really felt that way. I had the idea probably 15 years earlier, hey, what about a play about a string quartet? Because I'd always felt the voices of a string quartet and the voices of an ensemble in a play were very similar, right? There's a certain energy and interchange between voices that I found exciting. What I couldn't crack 15 years before I wrote the play was, well, in a string quartet, you can have 4 voices talking at the same time and it sounds like harmony, and in a play, it sounds like noise. So how do I solve that? By the time I got around to writing the play, I had gotten back to chamber music and I had written quite a few plays and figured I now had the craft maybe to undertake it. So it came fairly easy for me. When I say easy, meaning I only slaved away under 20 drafts instead of 30 drafts. But it was very cathartic because we recorded the entire score for the play in order that there would be essentially a soundtrack to the play, because the musicians have to rehearse and get it wrong and rehearse and get it a little less wrong and rehearse it and get it right. So it needed to be fixed. And the process of working with a young group of string players, a young, brilliant string quartet from Curtis, allowed me to feel that I hadn't abandoned my music career. I hadn't abandoned my viola. In a sense, I was able to return to it and make peace with it. And it was in my body and allowed me to write a play that for a lot of musicians felt very true. I think the most gratifying thing about the play was that musicians didn't stand up at the performances and say, "J'accuse." Take it. They were saying, "Oh my God, you actually captured it," which was, great for me. And it really did allow me to make peace. I felt like I'd kind of abandoned my wife or something for, 2 decades until I had written that play.
But meanwhile, your actual wife, I should mention, a certain Megan Belwar, who is a big fan of this podcast. So I'd like to do a shout out to her. I know she's listening to this, probably while she's driving up to her job teaching at DeSales. But both of you, as we need to wrap up, how would both of you sum up those years of developing new plays in Philadelphia? You mentioned there was sort of a special eagerness in the city audience to see new work. What stands out to you of your time in Philadelphia? Were you ready to move on from the Philadelphia theater scene by the time you left? Do you feel proud of what you left behind there, Carol?
Well, as I said, what I'm proudest of is that it was really a team effort on the part of those wonderful people I mentioned. It was our theater. And in fact, we just had a reunion last year to honor Michael, who had a wonderful play at the Arden. And I mean, it was the highlight of my 10 years to see everybody back together again.
What play was that, Michael?
This was Holy Grail of Memphis that premiered in February of 2024 at the Arden, or 2025.
Yeah.
And also that people still talk to us about that play I saw at Festival Theater. There was one play my darling husband, talks about once a month. It was called The Tablecloth of Turin by Ron Carlson. Do you remember this, Michael?
Oh, yes.
The tablecloth from Christ's Last Supper was hung in the theater, and a man was giving a lecture about it. It was beyond hilarious. So the fact that people remember a play that we all put on together, is the most gratifying.
Well, that is a wonderful note to end on. Thank you for bringing that into the room and on that holy and theatrical moment, that sacred moment in theater, which was so memorable to everyone. Carol Rocamora, Michael Hollinger, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been a real honor to have you.
Thanks, Peter.
Great to see you, Carol.
So that was a delightful conversation. And where are we off to on our next interview adventure, you ask me? Well, you may have noticed that Carol and Michael talked about one person in particular quite a lot during that interview. So much so, in fact, that right after it was over, I thought it was only proper to give that person a call, get him into the Zoom room to talk to us. And I'm thrilled to report that in a couple of weeks, the great Bruce Graham himself will be in here talking about how he became a great homegrown Philadelphia playwright. So if you enjoyed this episode, or if you have any thoughts or suggestions or compliments, drop me an email. just write to me at aithpodcast@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. If you want to support the show and our work here and at the same time get access to our monthly bonus episodes and other special members-only content, just go to www.patreon.com/AITHpodcast. Right now on Patreon, I'm doing a series about even more famous musicals that had their world premieres in Philly during the tryout town era of the mid-20th century. Or, a free and easy way to support us here is to leave a review about the show. If you liked it, just type up a few words about us. Leave a few stars on Apple Podcasts. And, of course, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram or Blue Sky. It's all places where we post new information about Philadelphia theater history almost every single day. You can look for my book, by the way. It's also called Adventures in Theater History. It's at all online retailers, you know the ones, or order it through your local independent bookstore. Ask your library to buy it. And for everyone, at no charge at all, folks, there will be additional images and information about this episode in the blog on our website, www.aithpodcast.com. The links for all these are in the show notes, or just search for us on the web. We're the only Philly theater history podcast out there. You're bound to find us. Thanks to all of you for listening to the show today and for coming along on another adventure in theater history, Philadelphia.